Hello good people, it's Professor Wachtel. In this video we will be discussing Aristotle's De Anima, Book 1, Chapter 1. Aristotle begins De Anima with a very basic definition of what soul is, and a larger goal, and then very quickly following a flood of questions that seems to shoot in many directions. His basic definition of the soul. He says, the soul is, in some sense, the principle of animal life. Notice that his qualifier, in some sense, suggests that this definition is a reasonable start, but that there is also a lot more to be said in order to define the soul. His goal, quote, our aim is to grasp and understand, first, it, that is the soul, first, its essential nature, and secondly, its properties. Very quickly, however, he seems to overwhelm the reader with a lot of questions. And this is not entirely shocking, given that he has not yet even given his full definition of what soul is. Not only is it not shocking, I suggest that it is a good thing. For a philosopher, to work on setting up the right questions can help the philosopher to better craft arguments and good answers to the problem at hand. Really, this is true of any instance regarding any subject when one wants to learn something, do something, or make something. Our questions set up our starting points. For students of philosophy, paying attention to a philosopher's questions can help us better understand the philosopher's arguments and answers. Here are some of Aristotle's initial questions in De Anima. What is the correct method by which to study the soul? Really, Aristotle notes, this is a question that needs to be asked with regard to every inquiry, since it's not evident that there is a single method by which every subject can be addressed. What general kind of thing is soul, he asks. In his words, in which of the summa genera does soul lie? When you see the word genera, think the word genre, which you almost certainly know. The question of what general kind of thing the soul is the question of in what way the soul should be categorized. At this very early stage, a question like this can be hard to grasp, so I will give you the answer. Aristotle says, the soul is an actuality. The soul is an actuality. When we consider Book 2, Chapter 1, we will see what Aristotle means when he says that the soul is an actuality. Is soul one or many? Is the soul the same everywhere, or does it itself have different parts and or different forms? Are human beings the only beings with souls? If not, do different beings with souls have different kinds of souls? If a dog has a soul, for example, does that require some kind of separate formula from a human soul? When studying soul, what to study first? The parts of soul, assuming that the soul has parts, or the functions of the soul? If we take up the functions of the soul, do we then need to have prior knowledge of those objects on which the functions work? This path of thinking seems to lead Aristotle in something like a circle. It seems that he worries that understanding of what the soul does requires prior understanding of the soul's nature, and also that understanding of the soul's nature requires understanding of what the soul does. I could see someone being confused by this, or thinking that Aristotle is confused in his own inquiry. I've been in the former position myself. I do not, however, think that Aristotle himself was confused. As a naturalist, Aristotle favors beginning with our experience of a thing. As Martha Nussbaum says, Aristotle does not believe we can coherently go beyond our own experience. In Book 1, Chapter 1 of De Anima, Aristotle says the following: "The knowledge of the essential nature of a substance is largely promoted by an acquaintance with its properties. For, when we are able to give an account conformable to experience of all or most of the properties of a substance, we shall be in the most favorable position to say something worth saying about the essential nature of that subject." That is, we can't come to an idea about the essence of anything out of nowhere. We need experience of the thing in question, and experience comes via acquaintance with the thing's properties. Of course, the thing that we are talking about in this context is the living being. De Anima is a book about living nature. Recall Aristotle's early definition of the soul. The soul is, in some sense, the principle of animal life. When he gets deeper into his analysis of the nature of soul, we will see that his book about soul is about living nature broadly, of which animal life is one part, and of which human life is a yet smaller part. When Aristotle refers to the properties of soul, he speaks of the affections of soul. This can seem puzzling because in ordinary talk we use the word affection to refer to expressions of love, or at least expressions of warm feelings. But as a path toward making sense to Aristotle's reference to the affections of soul, notice this: in ordinary talk we think of affection as both active and passive. It is both given and received. When one is giving affection, one affects another, your beloved, for example. When one receives affection, one is affected by another. In the former, one is active. In the latter, one is passive. Understanding the two sides of affection sheds light on Aristotle's reference to affections of the soul. In his usage, the affections of the soul are the ways in which the soul affects other things and the ways in which the soul is affected by other things. That is, the way the living being affects other things and the way the living being is affected by other things. The ways a living thing can affect and be affected are its properties. It may not seem like it, but Aristotle has made some progress. In the remainder of Book 1, Chapter 1, he addresses a single big question. Of the affections of the soul, he asks, are they all affections of the complex of body and soul? Or is there any one among them peculiar to the soul by itself? This question is the centerpiece of his discussion for the remainder of the book. It seems, Aristotle writes, that no affection of the soul could exist without the body, and he considers several examples. Could there be anger, courage, appetite, and sensation generally without the body? All one needs to do to answer this question is to reflect on one's own experience of those affections. Do you experience anything bodily in events of these affections, even in instances in which one is not aware of bodily concomitants to these affections? Aristotle suggests they are likely present. After all, he points out, sometimes minor stimulations bring out our feelings. And in other cases, sometimes we experience our feelings with no apparent external cause at all. Aristotle only considers one affection as possibly not involving the body: thinking. In his next sentence, however, he says that if thinking is dependent on certain conditions, then it must also be associated with the body. At this point, he doesn't say in so many words that thinking requires the body, but it is clear that he takes this idea as at least a working assumption. It is obvious, that is, we know through experience, that the affections of soul are enmattered, formulable essences. The meaning of enmattered is clear. That is, in matter, meaning in the body. What, however, is a formulable essence? In a nutshell, Aristotle thinks of the affections of the soul as instances of the soul exercising its powers. Detailed discussion of this idea occurs in De Anima, Book 2, Chapter 1. For now, we must stew on the idea of all affections of the soul involving a body. The result of Aristotle's barrage of questions in De Anima, Book 1, Chapter 1, is a starting point for the investigation of the nature of soul. The affections of soul are inseparable from the material substratum of animal life, and that is precisely why the study of the soul must fall within the science of nature. At this point, a caveat is necessary. Aristotle's commitment to naturalism does not mean commitment to materialism. Aristotle's commitment to naturalism does not mean commitment to materialism. The affections of the soul may be inseparable from the material substratum of animal life, but that does not mean that they can be reduced to bodily events. Being inseparable from the body does not mean ultimately being the same thing as the body and only the body. In Book 3 of De Anima, Aristotle will argue that thinking, in some sense, is separable from the body. The passages in which he discusses this idea are much in dispute. Aristotle should not be taken as having the idea that soul can exist separately from the body. Aristotle's position on the nature of soul and its relation to body is nothing like that found in many well-known religions, in which soul is understood as able to exist completely without the body as the independent essence of the person. Aristotle, we will see, views the living being as a unified whole of soul and body. A living being could not be a living being, in his understanding, without both soul and body. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has been helpful.